Good afternoon to you all. Welcome to another CLHO Colleague Circle. I'm Amherst Williams. I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut League of History Organizations, and we're really pleased to have with us once again today some folks from Connecticut Humanities to talk with their other new grant line, the NEH Connecticut Humanities SHARP Capacity Grants. Did I get that right? All right, awesome. So with us today, we have Jason Mancini, who's Connecticut Humanities Executive Director, Scott Wands, who is the Director of Grants and Programs at Connecticut Humanities, shiny new title just minted today, and Lian Partridge, who's Grants and Programs Assistant at Connecticut Humanities. And they're going to be talking us through this new grant line, the application process, and some of the sort of ideas behind this granting program, what it's designed to do. And we're going to have, as with last time with the operating support grants from the Connecticut Cultural Fund, we're going to try and set aside a lot of time to take and answer your questions about this new grant line. So without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Jason Mancini. Jason.
Thanks, Amherst. Hi, everybody. It turns out that Connecticut Humanities found the money tree. So we're very pleased to be able to offer an additional grant line coming to us through the Sustaining Humanities through the American Rescue Plan, or SHARP grants. And this is in addition to our operating support grant that Scott will not be talking about today. So I'm not going to spend any time talking about it because Scott will be able to walk all of you through this exciting opportunity, and Lian will be on the line answering any questions you might have in the chat. So good to see all of you, and we look forward to your applications.
Thank you, Jason. And first of all, Amherst, thank you again, and thanks to the Connecticut League. Really, you've been such a wonderful partner to work with, not the least of which is to host these lunchtime chats with us to be able to talk about the new funding opportunities, which is exciting, but we know also confusing. So our goal at the end of the hour here is to alleviate any concerns, answer any questions, and give people the answers they need to know to be able to access not just these operating support grants, which we've talked about in the past, which we're not talking about today, but also these SHARP opportunities, which we're going to go more into in detail. And I think that's the first thing I want to emphasize today is you can, if you are eligible for both an operating support grant as well as a SHARP grant, to apply for both, you are able to receive both. One does not preclude you from the other, nor does it preclude you from our other grant lines. So if you had interest in applying for a small project grant, one of our quick grants, or one of our larger planning or implementation grants, or you have one of those grant lines open, none of this is in competition with one another. You can have a SHARP grant, an operating support grant, as well as our other project-based grants. And we hope that many organizations will avail themselves of all those opportunities should you have the right projects needs for those opportunities. Also want to say, I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces. I'm seeing some faces I think that have been coming from the operating support. We're going to go into this in depth. We'll walk you through our website, the guidelines, and the application like we did before. And as Amber said, leaving ample time for Q&A. The one thing I want to say is these funds are coming from the National Endowment for the Humanities. So this is a different source of funding. This is funding that the NEH received from the American Recovery Plan, the Omnibus Federal Coronavirus Relief Plan that came out last spring. So that said, there are some different eligibility concerns that we need to talk about for organizations. Not all of the organizations that are eligible for the operating support grants are also eligible for these, and we'll highlight some of those. And if there are questions later on about your organization's eligibility, we can get into that. Again, haven't followed the rules of the funder. In this case, it's the NEH and the ARP, the American Recovery Plan. But the last thing I want to say is there is some similarities here to our regular capacity grant lines, but we've tried to really simplify things. So the types of projects that you might normally come to us for a regular capacity grant, like a strategic plan, are eligible here, but there are more types of projects that you can apply for these SHARP capacity grants than our normal capacity grants allow, and a simplified application process with less information required. If you were to normally come to us for a regular capacity grant to do strategic planning, we would be wanting to know which consultant you chose, why you chose that person, and be asking for an upload of that consultant's proposal to you. You do not need to have all of those things. If you do, great, you can share them, but you do not need to have all of those things to submit and be competitive for a SHARP grant. It would be enough to say we want to do a strategic plan. Here's why we want to do a strategic plan. Here are 2 or 3 consultants we're talking to right now, and you do not need to put up a copy of any proposals. So again, we're hopefully streamlining as well as allowing a bunch of different types of projects. But with that, I want to take you through, and I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to go like we did for some of the other webinars that you may have been a part of to our website, because that's really where everything starts. So if you go to cthumanities.org, under our work, you'll see here, we've got SHARP grants. So Jason's sliding over so I can be more central screen. All right, so also I want to thank Kathy Fields and Litchfield Historical Society for hosting us today. We're on the road. We have the first time our entire staff of 10, which is now 2 new hires in the last few months, getting together today at Litchfield Historical Society. So thank you to Kathy for hosting us today. So under the drop down under our work for grants and programs, you'll see SHARP grants. If you click that, you'll be where we are right now. And it has the same kind of information to explain what the grant line is, eligibility, and then links on the left to the guidelines, a preview of the application, and a link to our online grants portal. Some of you have heard me say this before, I'll say it again. If you click this apply button, we've cut out some of the steps. You will directly to the application at hand here for SHARP. Yes, there'll be a login screen, but if you have an account in our system, once you've logged in, it'll take you directly to an application that you can start filling out. And as always, you can be saving the application as you go along. There's a manual save button at the bottom of the screen. It'll also back up every few minutes. That said, if you walk away and you come back and you log in by clicking this apply button again, it'll take you to another blank application. This is where, don't get frustrated, don't start a new application. All the material you saved before is not gone. Just know you're going to have to click the little house icon at the top of the screen to go to your dashboard, and you'll see your applications in progress with us, including your SHARP grant, and you can click the blue edit button on the right to get back to the application where you left off. Let's talk about these grants here. So the operating support grants we talked about were non-competitive grants. Every organization that came in for an operating support grant and is an eligible organization will receive that grant. These are competitive grants. We have a finite amount of funding. This is funding, again, that came from the National Endowment for the Humanities through the American Rescue Plan. We have $640,000 to grant out. We are making these in the form of $10,000 or maximum $10,000 grant requests to us, but they are going to be competitive. I'm anticipating we're going to have somewhere around 100 to 120 applications probably at the end of the day, if not more. So the success rate, again, I'm estimating it could be more, it could be less. It's going to be probably around 50%. We are able to make grants to certain types of organizations here: 501c3s, 501c3 nonprofits, municipalities, and federally recognized Native American tribal nation organizations. So again, there's some other types of organizations that we were able to make grants to, including through fiscal sponsorships for the operating support grants. The NEH does not allow for fiscal sponsorship submissions. They don't allow for non-federally recognized tribes. On the other side, libraries are eligible for this funding, whereas libraries were not eligible for the operating support grants. If you've got any questions about eligibility, you can put them in the chat, or we can talk more about it later or offline. But again, if you are one of these things that is a museum, a historical society, a library, a cultural center that does exhibitions, public programs, walking tours, you are eligible. And looking at the faces here in the organizations, by and large, everyone I'm seeing on this call, with the exception of some arts organizations we'll get to in a second, we have to talk about the arts organizations, will be eligible. Because this is NEH funding, we have to make sure it's organizations that are doing humanities work, and there's more language here I'll highlight as we go along. And in this case, while we're asking for bylaws and the majority of your activities and expenditures going towards humanities activities, by and large, this is to gatekeep, again, the social service organizations from coming in the door. But also we have to make sure that some of the performing and presenting arts organizations that have not ability to come in from the NEH's rules are also being guided correctly and advised correctly as we go along. We talked about the funding, and the maximum request is $10,000. Same deadline as the operating support grants. Both of these will be due by midnight, November 15th. Just don't let the clock hit 12 again. We will be sharing news on this grant line as it goes along. You can see the press release that came out, the information session here. After this program, we will share the link to it on our website, as well as I know Amherst will be sharing it out. And we started a frequently asked questions sheet as well for the questions as they come up. But at the end of the day, after today's call, if you've got questions, just email Lian. I think many of you have, and she's very responsive and gets you answers in a very timely fashion. And we will continue to do that, whether you've got questions about this grant line or any of our grant lines. Let's jump into the guidelines. So if you click on the left here, you will jump to our guidelines page. There's some similarity in the look, but some important things to highlight and differences. So these are competitive grants that are project-based, but we're looking at project writ large. At the end of the day, this funding was made available so that organizations would be able to respond to and recover from the coronavirus pandemic. I've taken the language right from the federal guidelines here: prevent, prepare for. We're really talking about responding to and recover from, I think, in many cases here. But there are a whole variety in a non-finite list. There are other things. So if you have other ideas besides this, let us know. But we've tried to give a large sample of the types of things that this could be for. And it could be as simple as staffing. You want to bring back staff hours, hire additional staff, grow your staff in some sort of way, diversify your staff. That alone can be a project here for this grant line. It could be bringing on contractors to do some work that's going to help your institution from where we've been in the pandemic to where you want to go as an institution and helping serve your community going forward. And that could be a consultant or some other person. And if you've got an idea and you want to run it by us, let us know. We can talk about those ideas. But it could be from things ranging from improving your organization's IT and online presence to doing some strategic planning to figure out where you want to go over the next 3 to 5 years now that the whole world has shifted, to be able to figure out how to best market and talk to the public about who you are and what you do. Could be an audience survey. You want to talk to the public about what they're really looking for now, what programs and activities would encourage them to come out and work with you more than others. Could be financial assessment. It's been really hard on a lot of institutions. If you want to do some assessments, planning, development training to figure out how you can thrive and have a better bottom line at the end of the pandemic, that is allowed. Could be work on your collections, interpretation. Many organizations have been wanting to do inclusivity, diversity, equity, and access assessments, planning, and training. You could do it for that for your staff and board. Again, this is not a finite list. So if you've got other ideas that you're not seeing here, let us know. Who can apply? We talked about that. The one thing I want to highlight here is there is specific language here: organizations whose mission fall outside of the humanities and the humanistic social sciences, which includes the creation or performance of art, creative writing, autobiographies, memoirs, creative nonfiction. These organizations are not eligible to apply. You need to be doing humanities work. If you do both humanities and art-based work, you need to be highlighting the humanities content that you do and the ways that you share it, and you would have a pathway to eligibility. But if you are just a performing ballet company that does great performances without a lot of contextualization and talking about the humanities interaction with dance, again, we're glad that you came in for the operating support grants. There's going to be other ways that we're going to support you going forward. This, however, is not going to be the right grant line for you and your organization.
Scott, can I just jump in here while we're talking about eligibility, because there was a question from Mary in the chat about municipalities. She writes, municipalities will never have 51% towards the humanities. Would a municipality like Hartford still be eligible? And I wanted to highlight Lian's answer to that question, which is that the grant should be made to the municipal run organizations that do the humanities work rather than to the municipality itself.
Correct. So we're looking to help organizations like Brookside Farm in East Lyme, which we know is an organization that is owned by the town of East Lyme. So if your town library or your town museum or your town humanities museum, library, cultural organization, that's the entity in the pathway in the project that we're looking for here. Funding priorities. So again, there's going to be some that are from the NEH and there's some from us at Connecticut Humanities. The first one, this is coming straight from that NEH language, right from the federal legislation that made this funding available. And again, it's worth reaching out to your state, your federal House of Representatives rep and your US senators to thank them for including culture in the American Recovery Plan. CARES Act funding Now ARP funding is including carve-outs for culture, which is unprecedented and great, and ways of really thanking them for making this available. But its goal for the NEH and for the legislature is to help organizations in some way respond to the pandemic. That being said, I think almost anything any of you are going to be wanting to do going forward on a capacity level is going to be informed by responding to the pandemic. So don't think you have to have a really hard hit case of how bad COVID hit our town, as much as COVID affected us all. Your organization needs to figure out the right path forward to do your job best and to serve your public best. And the project you do, whether it be a consultant or staffing or programmatic work, behind the scenes to do better programmatic work, is all related to the pandemic happened, we have to respond appropriately. So that's one thing I want to leave you with. We still have a priority of us at Connecticut Humanities in the state right now of trying to help organizations bring back staff, help teachers improve their information technology. So if you have a project that can do some of those things, that's another area that we'd love to see the state continue to grow and thrive. As well as we want our state and our sector to continue to be more equitable and inclusive. And if there are projects that will help you better serve the whole community that you serve, parts of it that you're serving less well, ways that your staff and board can feel more empowered to do equity work, that's a priority of both us and the NEH in their language as well. And we do have one last one, geographic diversity. We know there are more organizations in Hartford and New Haven and along the 91 and 95 corridors. That said, it's a priority of ours to try to get this funding to all corners of the state, and we will be taking geography into consideration as we start to make awards as well. Eligible expenses. There are more finite ones here. This can be staffing. It can be honoraria. It can be the purchasing and licensing of materials and things that you need to do some of these trainings. There are some IT and digital expenses that are allowed, but note that for equipment, and we're getting a further definition next week of what all includes in equipment, there is a cap of 20% of the project cost. So that's something to take a note. If you ask for a $10,000 max grant, no more than 20% or $2,000 of it can go towards equipment. And they define equipment roughly, and we're looking for more definition of stuff that will be lasting more than a year. We know there's questions that you have, we have them probably ourselves, and we'll look to continue to get answers about that. And then again, other project related expenses that aren't prohibited below. Another great thing about this grant line, as well as the last one we were talking about for operating support, you don't need a match. I mean, this is unprecedented for the grants we have at Connecticut Humanities. You do not need to find a one-to-one, or some of the federal grants require more than one-to-one match. All you need to do is tell us the project you want and what you need help supporting. These grants will have the same project duration as the operating support grants, and that these grants come in November 15th. They'll be approved by our board at the December 21st board meeting. We'll be doing grant calls before Christmas. Again, it's part of the big Christmas bonanza blowout of awards. And all the grants will be given a January 1 to December 31 of 22, basically all of 22 period to do this stuff. But the way the legislation is written here, for ARP funds, you could also use some retroactive expenses that go back to when the American Recovery Plan was passed into federal law, which was March 15th of 21. So if you needed to do some expenses, you actually have not just your grant period in the contract, but nine months almost of activity before that. There are some more exclusions here to highlight. There's a whole bunch of unallowable expenses. Don't worry about that. We'll work with you on that. By and large, the kind of stuff that you're wanting to fund and do are fundable as long as they're not on this list. We can't do indirect costs here or general operating support. These are project grants as opposed to our operating grants. You can't be using it for equipment, again, that exceeds 20%. No travel is allowed for these, which is just something to take into consideration here. So if you've got a consultant who is going to be doing the work for you, they can't break out and give you a separate budget for travel that you want to fund as a standalone. However, if your consultant was going to charge you $8,000 and have $2,000 worth of line item travel expenses, have them create a $10,000 proposal that includes all the work they're doing and all their expenses, so that there has a $10,000 bill for the consultant. But it can't be travel broken out, either foreign or domestic. Again, like the other grant line we were talking about for operating support, can't be using this to do bricks and mortar work on your building or to acquire collections. For whatever reason, this language has a carve out by the NEH about environmental sustainability. So that's one thing we have to be careful for is, I don't know why. I want to save our planet. We can't save the planet through these project grants, and I don't know why. Can't be advocating for certain social and political things. A lot of the same language as before, but just go through these. If there's questions, let us know. We can answer them. Can't be using it for food or alcohol. We talked about the schedule. This is a federal grant. You will need a DUNS number to apply. Many of you already have DUNS numbers. Many of you got DUNS numbers for your CARES Act grants with us. If you didn't have them previously, you'll need to call that number up again here. There's a link in our guidelines where you can go to look up and get more information about how to find out if you have a DUNS number or how to apply for one if you don't have one. We're not requiring you to have a DUNS number to be able to submit your application. Know, however, that if you don't have one, it would behoove you to start applying sooner rather than later, because we cannot give you an award until we've got your DUNS number confirmed. But that will buy you another 6 or 8 weeks, basically, from when you submit until when you'll need to have that in and we're under contract. We will be reviewing these with our application review committee in December. And again, we'll notify you the week of December 20th. And as always, reach out to Lian for questions and assistance. Let's walk through the application itself. Again, if you click apply here, you'll go straight there for a blank application. We've got eligibility stuff at the beginning. Won't repeat that because we've already talked about it. By and large, the same kind of stuff we talked about: salary, consultants, helping serve your audience better. If you've got other great ideas, let us know. We've got some feeder questions here, yes, no questions. Again, these are not some trick that we're trying to do to scare you away. If you're a historical society, a museum that does humanities work, which many of you do, if you're doing history work, that's the humanities. This is to stop having all the social service orgs try to flood our grant lines and get discouraged. We do ask your organization type, and there'll be some follow-up questions based on that for 501c3s. Some of these are the same, some of these are different. This is where we're going to start to get at your DUNS number and stuff here, municipalities, other organizations. If you click other, let us know what that other type of organization is, but reach out to Lian. Again, we want to make sure you're not going down a long pathway where you don't have eligibility. The GuideStar questions are back. So when you fill out some of the early organizational information, you can click on this sunburst GuideStar icon in front of your EIN number or when the government gave you nonprofit status, and it will allow you to pull that answer straight from GuideStar so you don't have to look it up. And you can autofill those features by clicking on the icon. We do still want to know what organization type you have. You can click multiples. So if you are a history museum that also has an art gallery, click both. We want to know what your organizational purpose is, mission statement like we talked about earlier, and how the activities you do support that work. Again, looking for your social media handles so we can start to tag you after you receive a grant and highlight the project that we funded. And if you have not filled out a grant for us already, although we hope you're all working on your operating support grants, do update your organization's information at the top of the page. You'll see a little pencil icon next to your contact info tab on the far upper right, and please do update your mailing address and congressional districts. That said, this is a project grant, so we are going to have some fields here, although simplified, to talk about your project. Give your project a title, in this case, something that will clearly help talk about what it is. This is used by us internally when we're talking about your project, but again, if funded, this will end up on our website of funded projects and our press releases. So do have something that you're going to want to not just identify the project for both of our organizations, but for the public as well. These are fields that we have. So if you see project number for first time applicant, don't worry, I have to fill that in, not you. What is your project focus here? So again, there's a wide variety of things, but if you can start to say, we're doing a strategic plan and check off that, it'll help us start to be able to sort how many strategic planning asks we had versus how many audience assessments we had, and really figure out where the biggest need is in an easily sortable way. And if you clicked other, that's fine. Just let us know what the other is. Summarize your project in 2 sentences, 3 sentences. This again is something that helps our reviewers very quickly understand what's to come. But then after being funded, this will get used on our website when highlighting your project. So think about it not only in terms of whose eyes are on it, Scott and our committees, but that it's going to be on our website afterwards. And then describe your project. This is the heart of your grant. This is where the most material is asked for. Tell us a story. Tell us your story. Tell us what's been going on. Explain how the pandemic has been impacting your organization and your community, and how that relates to this project. Why is it needed? How is it going to help you? How is it going to help your community be able to thrive moving forward? Talk us through the work that you're going to do. Who's doing this work? If it's strategic planning, again, you don't need to know who your consultant is, but talk to us about, if you have one, how you selected it. If you haven't, who the people are you're going to be talking to and the process you're going to be using to select them. If you're hiring staff, let us know here what the role of that person is going to be. How are they going to be helping your organization move forward, do the mission-based humanities work that you do? You don't have to know who the person you're hiring is. You don't have to have a job description, but tell us why you want to hire a person and what that person will be doing to help you move forward. The next block is about impact. So how do you hope that this project and this work at the end of it is going to help you transform you moving forward? What's a few goals that you have to be able to serve the public, to be able to do work better at your organization? We have a question here about supporting the humanities. It's somewhat similar to the earlier block that talks about what you do currently. This block is not to be repetitive, but it's to talk about at the end of this, how are you going to be able to better serve the humanities? If you're hiring your first time part-time educator and all the work that you've done to serve the community has been based on board and volunteer service, and this is going to allow you to have a more regular person there to answer emails, let us know that you're setting yourself up to be a way to serve the public better at the end of this. We do want a block here about how the pandemic has impacted your organization. Don't worry about this is some sort of a trap. Again, we're trying to be able to document how the pandemic has been impacting places, to talk about it. And this is a question that's really required from the NEH. But like I said, you can talk about the pandemic writ large. It's not a game of who's been hurt the most here. It's a matter of a case of who's got the best projects to better serve the public going forward versus what's happened in the past. Schedule. Map out the work that's going to happen over the next year. If you're working with a strategic plan and you've got 4 meetings, calendar out here when those meetings are going to happen, who's going to be involved with them, what some of the work is that you're going to do at each of those meetings. If you're going to be launching a survey to talk to your members as that, when are you envisioning the survey is going to go out? When do you want to have a draft of the survey of the strategic plan done? When you're presenting it to your board? Kind of just take us through the timeline with the steps along the way to let our committee know you're thinking about the activities that are going to be happening to make this be successful. We have a project team section, but again, this is more lenient than our normal project team section. You can talk about the people that you know that are working on this, or the types of positions that you'll be hiring or doing this work if you don't know who the individuals are, and be describing the positions that will be coming. We have an optional resume and job description upload. You don't need to have your consultant chosen and a finalized job description, but if you have those things, let us know, upload them here. Do note that for our attachment blocks, they only take 1 attachment at a time. So you need to create 1 document if you've got 3 resumes with all 3 resumes in it. If you keep uploading them 1 at a time, the second one overrides the first and the third overrides the second, and you'll just keep overriding your data. We don't have, and many of you might have cursed this at one time or another, I have cursed it at one time or another, our CTH budget form, our project budget form. It is not in use at this because you do not need a match. So we've taken away that form and we just have a narrative block here. tell us line item what you want to use this funding on. It could be as simple as everything is going towards honoraria to one person or salaries and wages, but spell it out and spell it out by category here. Again, we're going to take the work that you do here and enter it into our system so it makes sense, but group stuff by salaries and wages, by honoraria. The difference here, if they are on your staff or board as a volunteer time, they're in salaries and wages. Anyone else doing work that is not a member of your staff or board, their time, paid or otherwise, should be an honoraria. Technical design services, if you're doing a lot of graphic design work and logo creation, that's there. Printing, copying, and supplies. As it says, whether you're photocopying, buying supplies for the project you're working on, that should go here. Equipment, room rental or purchase. I think this is a good category here to focus on, because the stuff here we got to make sure is no more than 20% of your grant amount. So if you're buying a laptop or you are buying a scanner to be able to do work, those are the kind of things that should be here. Promotion, if in some way this is a marketing project, there's going to be some marketing materials that you want to be having as part of this, that will go here. And evaluation, if you're doing an audience survey and you're hiring someone to do evaluation, I'll put it into the evaluation tab. We have a sample of the way to fill this out, some salary, some honoraria, some equipment. Again, equipment is less than 20%. And that's it. That is your budget. We do ask that you total up here the total amount of funding requested. That's just going to help us to be able to do sorts of our data. And then we're in optional stuff. If you have any other project attachments that you want to include, they're not required, but you can upload it here. If there's any additional information you want to share that's going to help us and our committee understand what's going on at your institution or with this project, not required, you can share it here. And then we're back into our normal people, the authorizing signatory, the name of the person you want to be on the contract if you get the grant, so we know who to have there so we can get the right signatures and get you under contract. The project director, the main point of contact for this project going forward, and who you want us to email and call first when we want to talk to you about your grant. And fiscal agent, and again, in this case, we refer to fiscal agent as the person responsible for managing the coming and going of grant funds. And as a check and balance, this does need to be a different person than the project director. The same person can't be managing the project completely and managing the purse completely. As a check and balance, we want two different people signing off to show that funds are being used appropriately. We do want to see a board list in your operating budgets for this year and last year. And again, whatever your current budget year is, that's what we want here. If your year runs through October 31st and you're submitting today, you're still in your current year, and your next year is the one that starts 2 days from now or 3 days from now on November 1st. We do not have hard signatures. It's just an application certification checkbox and the name of the person that's certifying it for your organization. And then again, our grants e-news opt-in. If you're not already getting our e-news, this will let you know about all our upcoming grant opportunities as they arise. And that said, I've talked for too much yet again, but we're at about the halfway point. So I'm going to stop sharing screen. If you have questions, do use the hand raise feature. And I know Amherst is going to start to bring us back through some of the questions that have already been coming in through the chat.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott. I want to, Lian's been doing a fabulous job of answering some of these questions in real time, but I know she's flagged a couple of questions for you specifically. And I wanted to go over the answers that she provided to some folks who had some questions around eligibility mainly. So Lee had a question about arts organizations. Let me find the question. So arts organizations that focus on exhibitions and arts education can apply or they can't. And Lian's answer to this was basically, if you're doing arts education, this is likely not a viable funding stream for you. But if you're a museum where the main focus is art exhibitions, you would be an eligible institution. And I think really the upshot of that is if you have questions about your eligibility, you should email Lian, and she can really walk you through the specifics of your organization. I don't know if you had anything that you wanted to add to that, Scott.
I think that's it. It's going to be a very case-by-case basis. And the number one thing is, I don't want to frustrate people. I don't want to frustrate new people that are coming in, that are knowing us for the first time, and having them go through a whole process of creating a project and submitting an application, and then having to get rejected and getting frustrated. So if you have questions about eligibility, let us know and we'll work with you on it. And again, we want the answer at the end of the day to be, if we say that you should come in, that we're not going to have any eligibility questions when it comes to the review. That's our number one goal. That said, we know that there are some organizations, and let's use an example of some of the larger art museums, a Wadsworth Athenaeum, a New Britain Museum of American Art. Yes, you present art, but you present it in thematic exhibitions, and you've got a robust public program series that helps talk about art history and the meaning of the art and the connections that art helps us make with society. By and large, if you have an eligible humanities project that will help support the humanities work that you do and you're at an institution like that, then yes, I think you're going to be eligible and you can apply. If you are, and I used a ballet earlier as an example, or you're primarily an art school where the work you're doing is to help people create art, learn about different media of art creation from printmaking to model drafting, and that's where your activities lie and focus, and you're not getting into art history and how the art interacts with our world from a humanities perspective and the impact it had on us as the past or the present or going forward, this is probably not the right grant line for you. Jason, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add there, or if that was.
That's pretty succinct, yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for clarifying that. Just to go over the rest of the eligibility questions that I've had so far, Leslie had a question about, colleges and universities, basically, would that be a case sort of similar to the municipality case we talked about earlier, in that there needs to be a connected museum or library in order to be eligible? And Lian said essentially the same thing. Yes, you would want the applicant to be the museum or the library, the subset of that larger institution, in order to be eligible. I didn't know if you wanted to add anything to that, about sort of, there's a related question here from Christy about two entities under the same municipality. Could they both apply? And I guess the same question would apply for a university. Like if the university has, a history museum within it or a library that does public programming, how would those sorts of applications work?
Yes. So the way, and again, this might be one we need to double check with NEH on to make sure that they don't have a prohibition. Us at Connecticut Humanities, we normally treat Yale Peabody and Yale University Art Gallery and Yale Repertory Theater and Yale British Museum as four separate entities, even though technically they're all under Yale's employer identification number. I think if there is a university that wants to come in for two of its entities, we should have a conversation about that. And I would need to run that by the NEH to make sure that they feel the same way and that they treat that the same way. I think we have a little bit broader use of what university components could come in here. So with the operating support grant, it was really, there's a public serving organization there, or something that serves as a public serving organization, whether it be a museum or a performing arts theater, something that has the public come with attendance or admission. I think if you are a university and you have a humanities center or a department that is doing important work in the humanities and you want to build up your capacity there, we should have a conversation, but there might be some additional eligibility. It doesn't need to be as core about an organization at the end of the day, but there needs to be some sort of an entity that's doing the humanities work and not just for Quinnipiac to do diversity training. We need to be talking about the humanities work that you're doing, that this entity does, and how this capacity grant is going to improve that entity's ability to serve the humanities for the public in a stronger way. And I think that's also key. If you're a university that really is working on a grant that's going to serve your students who pay tuition, but it's not going to serve the general public, this is probably not the right grant line for you either. You have to be doing public facing work in some way.
Yeah. And on that question of two entities that were under the same municipality, like say there's a museum and a library.
A municipality is easier. So yes, if you are a town that has a museum and also a library and you both want to come in, those are two separate organizations. I believe there's going to be two separate EIN numbers. If we find out you have the same EIN number, let us know and we'll raise that up the food chain to NEH. It's going to be a little bit harder when it's like Yale, where everything is under the omnibus of Yale. And I want to make sure that we're not having people fill out applications and not being compliant.
Great, thank you. We have a bunch of questions now that I think are more on the on the subject of what the funds can really be used for. So let's get into the details of that. We first had a question from Tracy about whether these funds could be used for something like exterior site signage and interpretation. Would that be an appropriate use of these funds?
I would say yes. I mean, I think if you're doing it's capacity work here, you're going to be improving the capacity of your public to be able to interpret your site in safe ways during the pandemic, because you're having limitations on who can come into your building and when they can come into your building, and the ability of your staff and your volunteers to be fully serving them indoors in the way you want. So you want to do safe work outdoors. I would say yes. Some of the keys here is we've got those equipment percentages. So we have to make sure that printing is good. Don't be putting more than 20% of stuff into equipment as part of your project request.
Great, thanks. The Connecticut Storytelling Center wonders if it's possible to request for two different things, like funding for diversity training and outreach to the schools.
You're only able to ask for one grant, so you can't submit two separate grant requests. That said, I think if you have two separate projects you want to be considered simultaneously under one request, I don't see a problem with that. Do you see a problem with that, Jason? No. You'd have to obviously articulate enough about both of them that the committee understands both halves of the work you want to do. And at the end of the day, you need to connect it back to how the training and the audience assessment are going to help you related to the pandemic. But yes, I think if you want to try to get more than one into one request, I don't see an issue with that.
Great. Could the funds be used for neglected cemetery restoration?
This is probably going to get into a harder one, and I should go back and look at the guidelines there. They get into the restoration preservation on a bricks and mortar, and I believe that translates probably to upkeep of a cemetery. I think they're going to look at, putting a roof on a building, painting the side of your building, and restoring a gravestone in much the same fashion. So I think when it comes to the work on preserving the cemetery, probably not a good match to this. However, if it's getting into intellectual assistance that you need to be able to do work, that would be a cleaner way. And if that specific cemetery has not come in, there might be some other ways. We funded some projects via quick grants over the last couple of years where it does both public education about cemeteries. So there's a public component to understand the value of cemeteries and why we need to care for these. And then some public displays and workshops where they're restoring them in the public's eye. And that work that's happening to restore a gravestone while the public is there has been funded through a quick grant.
That's great. And I just want to flag for everyone what just happened here is basically we had a question about an expense that first seemed ineligible, and through thinking about it a little bit more and in conversation with Scott, we were able to turn that into an eligible request. Well, okay, you have this project that you want to do. Here are some other ways to think about framing it so that it can be eligible under these guidelines. And I want to encourage everyone to get in touch with Lian and Scott for this reason. If you have ideas about something that you want to do, how might there be funds? How might a different perspective help you to see ways that you could fund that project through this grant line? I thought that was really lovely. Aaron has a supplement to that, so you could pay for an assessment of the stones as an alternate instead of just doing the restoration work, get some expert advice on how you might do that. The public
Correct.
Programming is another option there. So
exactly. And you could tie it to the pandemic very easily. Say that visitation to our cemetery, because people are looking for more outdoor things and they love the history of cemeteries, is up 40% since the pandemic hit. That said, we have increased wear and tear now on our grounds, and we need to have someone come in to figure out what the prioritization should be for use of our limited cemetery funds going forward to preserve and present this the best to the public. And that will be a SHARP project.
William asks, can you apply for the same project through the SHARP line and the Connecticut Cultural Fund operating support line?
So the long and short of this is yes. So if you were to get a $10,000 operating support grant and you were to apply for and receive a competitive $10,000 award to hire a new staff member, you could use all $20,000 of those funds to hire the staff person. You can't match our grant with our grant. On the other hand, neither of these grants are matching grants. You can't pay the same person $1 and bill it to two different grants. You have to have $2 worth of expenses, one going to each grant. But if you've got $20,000 of need, and between the two grants, you've got $20,000 of money, you can be getting $20,000 of work here on the same idea and the same project.
So basically, if the expenses are eligible for those two grant lines, or you're using them for different parts of the same project, as long as you're not double dipping, it's okay.
Yeah, you can't get $20,000 from us and pay somebody $10,000 because each grant gave you $10,000 for that person. That would be putting somebody in jail.
You all know not to do that, right? Allison asks, and we know about this in Wilton, we have a very busy holiday train show coming up. Can funding be used for seasonal or temporary help for an important event like that, for instance?
Yes.
Right.
Yes, I think that the key thing here is you're going to be applying for holiday shows in what year? Is it for both years? Because you could be applying for a SHARP grant now for seasonal help, and your project period runs Jan 1 to December 31st. So technically you could use it for next year's train show, but there's also the retroactivity of funds, which allow going back to March 15th. So you could use it for 2 years worth of train shows of temporary help should you need it.
Great. I'm sure Allison will be happy to hear that. Laura asks, I realize that capital expenses are not eligible, but what if the improvements are to make a site more accessible?
So this gets into that gray area, and we can have some more conversations about it. You know, I think if the accessibility is to have a project that's going to have $10,000 worth of help, and at the end of the day, you're going to be putting some QR codes at different places and getting a tablet with a QR reader so people can walk around the museum and be able to hear things if they've got sight difficulties or other ways of augmenting it. That is going to be accessible and fine. If it's to build a ramp and we're starting to get into construction projects that's transforming your building, I think we need to shift away from those based on the way these guidelines are really prohibiting capital work. So it's are we changing your physical structure, or are we doing stuff with your existing galleries and programs and tours? No to the former, yes to the latter. And we can have more specific conversations individually.
Thanks. And I'd love to have a follow-up conversation. Maybe this is something we can talk about at a future colleague circle, though, but we get inquiries often, and I don't really know what funds are out there or if there is much to do that kind of like the building of ramps, the ADA accessibility issues, which are often, big construction projects that transform a site. I would love to have a conversation about that at a future colleague circle where we can kind of talk about ideas, because I know a lot of places want to do this.
I think that would be a good one, and we could be a part of that as well. But I think it would be good to have someone from the Preservation Connecticut, one of their circuit riders, and maybe someone from Liz's office from State Historic Preservation Office, and get the right staff member there. Between SHPO, Preservation Connecticut, and Connecticut Humanities, we're going to serve different parts of the preservation related needs at different parts in the continuum of a project, or know where the other funds are.
A lot of those capital funds can and will be provided through the Good to Great grant program that will be forthcoming anyway. I'm not sure what their timeline is, but probably next year.
And the 1772 Foundation picks up some other things, but yeah, I think a colleague circle could help troubleshoot and point people in the right direction.
Yeah. Thanks for those tips already. That's really good. I always learn something from these programs too. So the Kent Historical Society wonders if we're applying to both for the same project, should we say so in the application?
Well, first of all, hi, Marge. Second of all, remember the operating support grant is not really being weighted on a project idea. So you can key in there that you want to use it for staffing and give us a little narrative about it, just to help us know where the funds are being envisioned. But no, you don't need to talk about that this is going to be used on both grants. You just fill out the operating support, how you envision those funds, give us all the project details here, and that's sufficient.
Yeah. Lian, you had something you wanted to emphasize. Do you want to just come off mute and say that?
You'd have to go on mute.
Oh, I'm going on mute. Hang on. We're trying to not have the echo chamber effect.
Yeah, I just want. You're gonna have to mute.
I have to do one more thing.
We're at the same desk. I just wanted to emphasize basically what Scott said, that this is a general, or the Connecticut Cultural Fund Operating Support Grant is general operating support. So you're not requesting funds for a specific project, and you're not creating a budget for a specific project that you're requesting through showing us the line items of what you want. This is general operating support. So you can think of the SHARP funds as a project, but the general operating support is not a project.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so we're starting to confuse things maybe in people's minds, because there's the Connecticut Cultural Fund Operating Support Grants, which many of you and should be applying for are applying for. If you haven't started, apply for it now. You will get at least $5,000. And that really is just operating support. You don't, as Lian and Scott said, you don't have to describe a particular project in there. There are questions about what you plan to use the funds for, but it doesn't affect.
And it's not concrete. It's not concrete. So if you get those, as long as you're not going to spend them on ineligible things at the end of the day, if you get both that operating support grant and the SHARP capacity grant, and you can meet the needs of what you put for operating support with SHARP, and you can redeploy the operating support in some other way without our permission, because we're not approving use of those funds. We're just trying to figure out where organizations are wanting the funds to go. So you can say 50% of the grants came in, wanted it for salary, and we're envisioning it for salary, and we can start to have a bigger field of what the field's needs are right now. So that's a better way to think about it.
Thanks. And that's the other grant line that we had an info session on a couple of weeks ago. So Tina from the Avon Public Library asks if you can walk us through an example of a project involving digitizing a local history collection. Would the public component be the digital access itself, or would you prefer to see the actual history programs as a part of the project? Can you talk a little bit about how someone might frame that for the SHARP grant line?
So I think it's key, if you're doing a digitization project or a collections-based project or an archival-based project, to talk about in the course of your narrative how you're envisioning this being shared with the public afterwards. That could be, these are materials which are going to be used in the next exhibition you're doing, and you can't do the public exhibition because you don't have the materials in the right format and use for that. It could be that this important collection is going to help connect back to the curriculum that you're doing and the school programs you're doing, or that you get a ton of research requests to be able to access this part of your collection that is basically inaccessible right now, or unfindable unless you physically go into the museum or the library, because all the finding aids and everything are physical and require being in person. And this project is going to be digitizing and providing access in a safe way online to be able to serve those research requests without having as much physical traffic in the building. Those are the kinds of things I think to be able to connect to the work that needs to happen, and then how the public is going to be using it at the end of the day.
Great, thanks. That wraps up the questions that I see in the chat. I want to open things up. We have just a few more minutes left. Does anyone have any other pressing questions? You want to raise your hand and come off mute to just ask something live now? Marjorie.
Hello. So this versus a quick grant. If you have a project that you want to do and you want to do it like the next 3 months, let's say, would you say it's better to do a quick grant for that and this be a longer term, larger, all-encompassing year-long project?
So I would say right now, if you've got a small amount of money that you need and it's under $5,000 and the operating support grant is going to meet that need, and you wouldn't need operating support for something else, just come in for the operating support grant. At the end of the day, you're going to get at least $5,000. which is $1 more than the max a quick grant can give anyway. And if that serves your needs and makes you whole, do that. If you would like to go for the operating support and have a public-facing public program funded, the quick grant is still probably the right way to go, because by and large, the SHARP capacity grants are supposed to be more behind the scenes stuff than in the public stuff. If you're doing a lecture series or an exhibition, I would still direct you towards a quick grant. You know, and there's some gray areas here, and I was talking to, I think it was Tracy and Shelton, about an outside sign project at our site, which is starting to ship into project, but I think it's enough with the pandemic that it's a safe road and be a competitive project as a SHARP grant, because the SHARP capacity grants are doing everything our normal capacity does and more. So I think we can have some more offline conversations about the specific thing that you want, but if it's a lecture series or an exhibit, I would still by and large say go quick grant versus the SHARP capacity.
Thank you.
Leslie.
Hi. So I just wonder if you could elaborate a little. I heard you mention earlier that you could, I think you said go back to March of 2021 in some retroactive way when applying for funding. I didn't quite catch all that or understand it, and I wonder if you could explain that.
So again, I think it depends on what the project is and how you're wanting to articulate it to a committee and be successful. But let's say you came in for a project and you were already doing some of that work now, or you did some of that work into the fall or going back further. Again, you're describing a project that has expenses that happen on both sides of a funding line here, and that's okay with the NEH in here. So if you have been doing a digitization project and you get funded to do that digitization project and you wanted to have some of the funding you paid out to buy a scanner or something now reimbursed from the NEH through this grant, that would be allowable.
So specifically, I'm thinking about seasonal help, so that we could increase the amount of hours that were open to the public. I just don't know if I mean, are we able to count what we might have paid to seasonal help this year, or should we just focus on what we hope to do next year?
In that case, I would talk about the future. I think it's kind of hard for our committee to really wrap their head around a competitive grant of like, we want you to reimburse you for the stuff you've already paid in the hours, because then you're not bringing any new hours on that apartment time. You're not bringing anyone back. And I think that's what's going to make you competitive is you say, with this funding, we'll be able to do this activity staffing wise that we wouldn't have been able to do without your help. That makes you competitive.
Okay.
You know, but like I said, if it was a project that had some hard expenses that now you want to be covered because, man, you paid for that, but it's really been hampering you, that would be, I think, a different argument to make.
That makes sense. I just wanted to make sure I was understanding it correctly. Thanks.
Yeah.
Great, thanks, Leslie. And I just want to just call out what my colleague Greg Colati, who runs the Connecticut Digital Archive out at UConn, popped in there, and I'm popping in something about what CLHO provides in this area as well. But if you folks are interested in digitization projects or in making your collections more accessible, getting a good collections management system in place, making collection items searchable to the public online. If you just want to make them available to the public, you're not really interested in organization, you want digital preservation, you should talk to Greg and the folks at the CTDA. If you're interested in collections management services, please talk to us at CLHO. We have a project called Connecticut Collections, and I believe that SHARP funds can be used to, pay for data migration to Connecticut Collections and support those annual fees and things like that. So you're welcome to get in touch with me or Diane Lee, who's the project manager of Connecticut Collections for us here at the League. I'd be happy to answer more questions about that as well, but we'd love to hear from you if you're interested in that sort of work. We're 2 minutes past 1 o'clock. Thank you all for sticking with us. It sounds like from the comments in the chat, folks that this has been a really helpful session, and it has been helpful for me as well. I always like to better understand the ins and outs of these applications, because people are always coming to the league as well for questions on, how to support different projects and what are the good grants to apply for. So thank you very much, Jason, Scott, and Lian, for this incredibly informative presentation and walkthrough. Thank you for your time to answer all of these questions, and the time that you will be spending over the next few weeks to field all the rest of the questions that didn't get asked today. I encourage you all, if you have further questions about eligibility or projects or want to just think through something, to please contact Lian or Scott. They're always happy. They're so supportive and really, eager to work with you to help get you in. And apply for these, but apply for the Connecticut Cultural Fund Operating Support Grants. You will get money. It is not a big application. It is not a competitive process. And we want as many people as possible to apply for those. So spread the word among your friends in the community. And we look forward to seeing you again in a future league program. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amherst.
And as much as I love getting your emails, do email Lian as your first default, because my inbox and my meeting schedule, you'll get a quicker answer if you go straight to Lian.
Good point.